Welcome to Logos TV and to our segment today on Coptic civilization. I'm Michael Saad. Our honored guest today is a special personality from the Coptic diaspora, His Grace Bishop Suriel of Melbourne, Australia. Welcome, Your Grace.
Thank you very much. It's a pleasure to be here with you.
I'm honored and also very blessed with your kindness to be my guest today.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
When the Copts immigrated from Egypt to different places of the world, they did not just go for professional ambition and other personal desires, but also they carried with them several aspects or many aspects of Coptic civilization. They carried with them art, music, architecture, spirituality, monasticism, liturgy, literature, language. And the product is amazing, especially manifested in the second generation in the diaspora. His Grace Bishop Suriel is a role model of this case in history. His Grace was born in Port Said and then immigrated with the family at young age in 1967 to Sydney, Australia. A few decades later, in 1999, he became the Bishop of Melbourne. Quite a journey, very attractive journey, and would be very interested, Your Grace, to hear the journey from Port Said to Sydney to becoming responsible for the Diocese of Melbourne. It must have been amazing. How did you grow up in Sydney and then became attracted to Coptic monastic life? Then circled around the world. I know you spent time in Honolulu as a monk and time in New Jersey as bishop, general bishop for the diocese, the archdiocese, and then the Bishop of Melbourne, and here we are meeting in Los Angeles. It's an amazing journey that we love to hear about it.
Sure, it's been a blessed journey for me throughout my life, and I think I've been very blessed. As you said, I was born in Port Said, and then before the war in 1967, we traveled by ship to Australia. And actually, the ship didn't land in Sydney, but landed in Melbourne. And they took us to a center where migrants gathered in a town called Bonagilla in the state of Victoria. And from there, my father went to look for work in Sydney, and eventually we moved up there. And didn't have an easy, my parents didn't have an easy life, but my father was a watchmaker, and he opened a business, and a few weeks into that business, his shop was broken into, and then a few weeks later, our house was broken into, so it was not an easy beginning, but they strived. And also with respect to the church, when we went to Australia, there were no Coptic Orthodox churches. And so the small group of Copts would gather together in a hall, would pray together, would read the Bible together, sing some hymns together, but then they felt the importance of the presence of the church and having a priest, so they sent to the late Pope Tawadros II and requesting that he would send a priest to serve us. And he did send in 1969 the late Very Reverend Father Mina Ni'matallah, who came actually by ship also and prayed the first liturgy in Melbourne before going up to Sydney and beginning to serve the community there, and the church began to flourish. But for my parents, their faith was very central and very important, that they wanted their children to grow up within the church, and so this was very important for them. I remember also that they wouldn't let us speak in English at home. We had begun as young children. I was 4 years old when I went there to speak English at home, but they insisted that we would continue to speak Arabic at home and leave the English to the school, so that we would gain that language and not lose it. And I'm very grateful to my parents that they taught me Arabic, because it has come in very, very handy with a lot of the work that I'm doing, and especially the research that I'm currently doing as well.
Your Grace graduated from college in Sydney, right?
Yes,
and then you, between graduation from college and going to monastic life in Wadi al-Natrun, what gradually implanted in your heart the love of monastic life?
I think being brought up in the church, serving as a Sunday school teacher, the church became central to my life. I was there many, many days during the week, formed a lot of great friends, but there was a deep desire in my heart that there was more to this life than just working and studying, but I felt that I wanted to develop my relationship with Christ more, and I could see that the best way to do this was through going to the monastery. And I didn't want to go to a monastery outside of Egypt. There was only one or two at the time, but I wanted to go back to the roots of monasticism in the deserts of Egypt, where I felt there I would get the true rich monastic heritage. And so from the age of 15, actually, I started to think about monastic life.
And your inner feeling and the calling from God to monastic life has been growing since age 15 until you actually actualized in your life by going to Egypt and knocking at the door of the monastery and say, please accept me, and which I'm glad they did. And
it was a blessing for me. I went to Egypt several times after I finished my studies, and spent some time in the monasteries in Egypt, and it only confirmed for me that, you know, this was what God was calling me to, and it was a very joyful feeling. I couldn't wait for the day that I would finally enter into the monastery.
In 1993, you were ordained a priest, and then in 96, you were sent on a mission to the Diocese of Los Angeles, the branch of Hawaii, and to minister there for the church. And during that time, your ministry, you also, apparently the education part is ingrained in your heart and soul. So you studied there theology, and then you went to New York, you went back to Egypt, where you were ordained as General Bishop, and in 1997, and came to the diocese in the Archdiocese, where you studied also at Saint Vladimir's Theological Seminary to receive a master's degree. Please tell us about this educational journey in your life, from including Saint Vladimir's experience.
Yeah. Well, I think the period I spent in Hawaii was a very good period under the guidance of His Grace Bishop Serapion, and I learned so much from him during this brief year and a half that I was here in Honolulu serving a small community, but I took it seriously and tried to work as much as I can with a small youth group that was there. But it was also a good opportunity to study, and I was living with a Catholic order of brothers, the Marianist order, and there was a university that was attached to that, Chaminade University, so it was an opportunity to do some courses in theology and the New Testament, and really opened my eyes to a lot of things that I was not aware of in the field of theology. And at the time there was something called the Jesus 2000 seminar, and some of the ideology that was coming out of this made me aware of the importance of Orthodox teaching, and how we need to be able to respond to some of these strange teachings that were beginning to creep into Western culture. But it was a good opportunity to study at Hawaii, and also then to continue that study in an Orthodox school in New York at St. Vladimir's. I didn't actually complete the master's because I was called to go to Melbourne in 1999, but I completed the studies there at the Australian Catholic University and received the Masters of Religious Education.
But before you left America to Australia as a Bishop of Melbourne, you published a book entitled Christ, Our Life and Hope, Spiritual Talk for Youth, Parents and Leaders.
I was hoping actually to publish that book. It was a series of lectures that I had given while I was in Hawaii and in New York.
Okay.
I still have many of those lectures, and hopefully after I finish my current research that I can publish that book.
The Diocese of Melbourne include also Canberra and Tasmania, the island of Australia, and South Australia, Western Australia, and New Zealand. I was fortunate to visit Australia and New Zealand. I was delighted to find a few Coptic churches in New Zealand. It's an amazing, unimaginable 50 years ago that there will be a Coptic church in Australia and New Zealand, or maybe 60 years ago. That's amazing. What is the numbers of churches, families, how they are doing?
Well, the church has expanded a lot within Australia and within my diocese in particular. I remember when I went to Melbourne, there was only 6 churches there, and about 10 priests. But now in Melbourne we have 11 parishes, and we have about 22 priests in Melbourne alone. And also we have a theological college which was not there, a Coptic school, and also a monastery. We also have a house for the elderly, a Coptic hostel that has 30 residents at the moment, and we're expanding that to a nursing home that will house about 87 residents. And then in New Zealand there was only 1 parish. Now we have 4 parishes in New Zealand, so that has grown as well. In Canberra we have 1 parish. Tasmania did not have a church when I went. We have a parish there now. In South Australia we had 1 parish when I arrived, but now there is 2. And also in Perth, in Western Australia, we now have 2 parishes. But then we began also some mission work in the South Pacific, in particular in Fiji, where now we've established 3 parishes and also establishing a new orphanage at the moment.
I would love to have a special segment of our program, Coptic Civilization, focused on your diocese in several aspects. That's in the next segment, but I wanted to thank Your Grace for something outside this segment, which is you are Your Grace, one of 6 bishops who endorsed the nomination of now His Holiness Pope Tawadros II. And I wanted to thank you personally and on behalf of everyone who is delighted in Christ for the divine choice. And we are very thankful to divine providence and to Your Grace for start initiating the effort. What is special about then Bishop Tawadros that made you endorse him? And you had only 2 endorsements to make. And I'm not going to ask you, but unless you volunteer, to tell us who was the second nominee that you endorsed, and why especially you endorsed then Bishop Tawadros.
Well, it was a great blessing actually to endorse the then His Grace Bishop Tawadros. I had known him for many years since I entered the monastery. He had already gone out to serve in Buhera before I became a monk. But in the times that I used to meet him when he used to come for retreats in the monastery, I always felt that he was a humble man, meek and yet very deep in his spirituality. I got to know him more when he was ordained as a bishop, because we were actually ordained bishops together on the 15th of June 1997, along with His Grace Bishop Raphael and His Grace Bishop Gabriel. So we spent also about 2 months traveling together with His Holiness Pope Shenouda III, and got to know him more closely during that time, and also in my many visits coming to Egypt. So I felt that even though that he seemed quiet and people did not know much about him, but I felt that he was a good administrator and very humble and meek man, yet very ascetic and very deep in his spirituality, in his learning, and I thought that he would make a great pope. And we thank the Lord that he was chosen to be the 118th Pope of Alexandria. And already in a very short time, he has done amazing things and has started on the right track with many great things for the Church.
Your current trip to America, I read about your visit to St. Vladimir Seminary and also to Holy Cross Greek Orthodox Theological College in Boston. So Your Grace is establishing bridges between theological education from the Oriental Orthodox churches, especially from your diocese, with the Greek Orthodox and the Russian Orthodox. What do you see the future in this endeavor?
Look, I think it's very important for our church that we have these dialogues, because, you know, the 2 families of Orthodoxy have so much in common, and there is a common dialogue, there is an official dialogue between the Eastern Orthodox churches and the Oriental Orthodox churches. And we hope that this dialogue, you know, can come to fruition, and that our 2 families of Orthodoxy can be united together. And I think that all of our peoples are wanting this to happen. And I think through establishing bridges with such theological colleges, that this can be an avenue perhaps for that dialogue to continue and to actually bear much fruit. So, and I think for our theological education in our church, it needs a lot of work, and we need to bring it up to a proper academic and international standard, and to have accreditation for our theological college in Egypt. And I know that His Holiness Pope Tawadros II is very interested to talk about this, and he will in the conference on theological education. And I think we need to bring these partners in and to learn from their journeys as well, and what they have done in theological education, and what they have achieved, and what we can learn from them perhaps.
I learned that His Holiness Pope Tawadros II has established 5 focus areas. On focus area 1, monasticism; 2, education; 3, family issues; 4, clergy councils; 5, lay councils. So education is one of his focus areas. And is that theological education in particular? And what's your expectations of the future of that focus area, Your Grace?
I think probably the focus is twofold: the religious education and looking at the curriculum of religious education across the church, which is indeed something that needs a careful study, and to look at proper pedagogical philosophies to bring our curricula up to standard. And so I think His Holiness is very concerned about that. And also indeed theological education, because we really don't have many theological colleges in our church that are accredited and can offer awards that would be internationally recognized. And I think that will be an important focus in a conference coming up soon.
That's definitely a desire, and it would make the soul of Archdeacon Habib Gerges, your mentor and role model, very happy up in heaven to see that 100 years later there is from his initial push for Coptic education is bearing fruits worldwide. And the college that Your Grace established and promoted in the Diocese of Melbourne, St. Athanasius Coptic Orthodox Theological College, being accredited by MCD University of Divinity in Melbourne, would provide a role model or an example of workable example for our seminaries in Egypt and worldwide to seek such thing. As we come to the closure of the program, I would like to ask Your Grace to give us one word of wisdom to conclude this session.
Well, I think it was the dream of Archdeacon Habib Gerges, and he struggled and he worked very hard to see the theological college in Egypt to reach that international standard. But he was met with a lot of resistance, a lot of difficulties that maybe we'll discuss in a future episode. But I think that he would be proud to see the Coptic Orthodox Church today to begin fulfilling that dream that he had.
Thank you so much, Your Grace.
Thank you.
We have been honored by the presence with us today at Logos TV of His Grace Bishop Suriel of the Diocese of Melbourne in Australia. This has been another episode of Coptic Civilization. I'm Michael Saad. See you next week.
Yeah.